So your guidance in giving us strength so that we may proceed to today's proceedings in whatever we have to do. These we ask in your merciful name. Amen.
Thank you. We have apologies for absence from Member Miller, Member Lambert-Brown. We do have some members online. We have Member Hamilton online. And I believe Member Crawford will be online as well. Member Green indicated that he's on his way. And so we will get started. We'll take the minutes at the end of the session, if members are okay with that. Or today, let me extend welcome to Mr. Maurice Saunders, who is here with us representing private tutors and homeschooling parents.
That is correct, Minister.
Awesome. And he sent in a written submission that all of us as members should have. Right, in soft copy, right, that we all should have. I think in due course we'll get a hard copy. And so I'm going to invite Mr. Maurice Saunders to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Minister. So let me also acknowledge Minister, Minister Williams, Chair, members of this committee, staff, officers of the Honorable Houses, and I ask that you accept my greetings, my well wishes, and my prayers. I've already been introduced, but let me just repeat, assure you, yes, that I am Maurice C. Saunders. I am an attorney at law, retired from the Norman Mandel Law School. I'm a member of boards of directors of various schools. I am a parent, and I am a member of the advisory board of the Jamaica Teaching Council. I was wondering how to make my presentation, since I'm not a PowerPoint person, and since I don't want you to fall asleep. But nevertheless, I feel strongly enough to try and make the points. So if you'll permit me to read, it's not a long paper, not a long set of submissions, but if you allow me to read, I think I'll have enough time to read, perhaps skip some things, perhaps add a little in some places, a little commentary for emphasis. So again, I invite you to look, starting with the cover page, entitled Submissions, and at the bottom, you see my name and some of who I am and what I am. So I move to page 2, and I will read. What am I here about? I write and speak on behalf of teachers and persons who are involved in the business of providing teaching and other instructional services through privately made contractual arrangements to students of varying ages, although mainly at the secondary level. I write and speak on behalf of former and current students who have been and are the recipients of these teachings, these lessons and instructions in those situations. And I write and speak as a parent myself and on behalf of the parents of those students referred to. I write also as a retired teacher or tutor with years of experience as a teacher involved in practical and vocational training at the postgraduate level of law in the professional institutional environment. So why am I here? What is the issue? Or what are the issues? The main issue or issues which these submissions are directed at are in relation to the proposals stemming from the provisions of the Jamaica Teaching Council Act 2022, which bring, firstly, private extra lessons contractual arrangements, as well as 2 homeschooling arrangements made usually by the parents of children in the context of the family under the control of the government's Ministry of Education. And if you look at the Act, you will see, if you look at the definition of teacher, which is in the interpretation section, and if you look at section 4, subsection 1, and sections 24 and 25, you will see how the teachers I'm speaking about are brought under the control of the state. I did hear a previous submission that perhaps these teachers are really instructors. That seems to me to be a nice way of escaping the requirements of teacher. But I would prefer not to rely on some escape route, some loophole in the Act, but just to acknowledge that you have teachers. So many of us here, perhaps, have utilized the services of private extra lessons teachers, right? And just be real, admit that they are teachers, with or without certification. And those are the persons I'm speaking about, along, of course, with their students and parents. And so I continue on page 2. On the issues, the second paragraph. In the case of the private extra lessons arrangements, this is being done by defining teacher in a way that may well apply to the teacher in those arrangements who is so required by the provisions of the legislation to be certified in order to lawfully engage in the activity of teaching. In the case of homeschooling, this control is effected for now by requiring that the homeschool participants be registered with the Ministry of Education. The undersigned author of these submissions herein is of the view that these requirements for the certification of teachers involved in private arrangements for extra lessons and for the registration are, given the mandate of the Jamaica Teaching Council with its declared focus to be upon transforming teaching into a more recognized profession, entirely unnecessary, unjustified, uncalled for, and amounts to an overreach in gaining control of these situations. Coincidentally also, let me mention, I did see some weeks ago a former educator, I think well respected and well known, on television, expressing her concern too about what she thought was overreach in the bill. So I join all those who say, after all, I'm a part of the advisory board of the Teaching Council, and I agree that the intention of making the teaching profession more professional, of bringing more dignity to it, is a good, it is a noble thing, it's a desirable thing, is something that should work towards. But when all is said and done, I do believe that there are flaws in this act, and I'm particularizing this one. Okay? And so, our submission and recommendations at the top of page 3 is that accordingly it is submitted and recommended that the scope, extent, application, and reach of the legislation requiring certification or licensing of teachers and the registration of homeschooling in the circumstances referred to above be and made inapplicable or clearly restricted in relation to the persons who teach or instruct students in those two areas of teacher-student interaction and activity in circumstances, in pursuance of arrangements entered into privately and or outside of the official education system. Hence, we recommend that the parties and players in these areas of teaching and learning be facilitated and encouraged in the delivery of services rendered and in the receipt of learning of the information that is being communicated, but otherwise that they be left alone to arrange and to do privately what they do best. That is, to teach or to impart information and knowledge to a student who receives that information and that knowledge. So, in other words, the state can still allow or have facilities so that persons who teach in those circumstances, if they wish, can always pursue the diploma in education or a degree in education and improve or enhance themselves. Okay? That facility should be open. Or if they wish to become a part of the official teaching structure, to be able to access it, to be able to contribute towards a pension scheme and all of those things, but not to interfere in the arrangements that they make privately with students and parents for private extra lessons. Let us look a little bit at the background to the issues and the problems. So we have the issues, and you have heard the recommendation. That is the short of it. But as I listened to this debate, to the discussion going on, I felt moved. I gave it more thought, and more ideas came to me. Background to the issues and problems. Over the years, it has been widely known and recognized and accepted that most of the weaknesses and shortcomings in Jamaica's education system has been primarily in the government's owned, operated, funded, financially subsidized, and controlled education system and institutions, especially more so at the primary and secondary or high school levels of the system. There, as we know, outstanding exceptions, but by and large, we know that that is where the problem is. All that I'm saying is focus on that. Start with that. Leave the private people alone. On the other hand, there is no complaint that we are aware of in relation to the system of contractual arrangements entered into privately between persons, whether parents or students themselves, who are seeking the services of a teacher outside of the usual official school system to teach a student some subject or a part of a course, or even simply a small but specialized aspect of a course. These private arrangements may extend to subjects that are not available or offered in the official school system, or even to extracurricular activities and skills, such as music, cultural skills, or sports. So we have those, okay? These arrangements have existed for decades, from I was a child and before I was a child, okay? Some of us have had the experience of being students in school, being taught by other senior or former students of the same school who have recently completed their schooling. These private arrangements have been a successful addition to the official school system, in which it has greatly enhanced. Every year, many outstanding and successful students attest to the contribution of the extra lessons to their success in both overseas examinations as well as their improved performance within their respective schools. The extra lesson system, as well as homeschooling, has been a great success without the intrusion or intervention of governmental authorities. So why now seek to fix or try to fix something that is not in need of fixing? Soon, we are in June now, at the end of June. In a few months, I expect that we'll be hearing of the results of students who have done overseas examinations or local examinations. And if you look out, every year, I don't know what will happen this year, the worst year after COVID, okay? But every year, we see students who have done so well that they're interviewed and they're asked, how did you manage this? How did you achieve this? And so many of them refer to the extra lessons that they did. There are schools in which, and good schools too, or reputable schools, in which a school may not have a particular subject available for a particular student, and they may have to seek it outside, right? It makes it far more difficult if you're going to say, well, the teacher who is going to teach you needs to be certified. Leave the people to make their arrangements. There are things other than certification that counts. For me as a parent, it may be easier for my child to walk around the corner to a teacher who is nearby, where the child can walk back home. Might be easier for me to pick up and transport. And that might be more important than whether the teacher is certified or uncertified. Jamaicans do well when left as individuals to innovate and initiate for themselves, to help to improve the lives and quality thereof without unnecessary governmental interference. Of course, these teachers should also be facilitated to utilize opportunities to pursue courses to become certified or licensed, should they feel the need to do so. And they should be facilitated to also participate, if possible, in pension arrangements for teachers. Let me just say this quickly. I am not a person for free for all. Even in a democratic society, you need some regulation. But we need to be able to look quickly at those areas where regulation is not necessary. And I submit that this is one such area. I don't hear of complaints. All I hear of is enhancement and good reports coming back. At the top of page 4, but other than facilitating and encouraging them, our advice is that we leave those teachers and the parents and students who need their services and prefer to hire them, that they be at liberty to continue to do so. Any implementation of the proposal to require those teachers to be certified or licensed in order to teach is likely to result in a drastic reduction in the supply or availability of such teachers, and will likely also stifle demand for their services within Jamaica. The trade or business will likely be driven underground. The proposed restrictions, which is what the requirement will really amount to in relation to education and the exchange of information and in access to information, especially for students, is likely to have an adverse effect on investments and in the area of economic life, and a slowing down in economic development in terms of the availability of skilled human resources. Let me just pause again to remember, when I speak of overseas examinations, in addition to the CXCs or CSEC, remember some people do the SAT, the American Scholastic Aptitude Test. And there are other examinations that they do for admission to institutions overseas. I'm saying leave them alone. If it comes within the official school system, fine. But for private arrangements, let them thrive. We would most respectfully suggest that this bill be made to focus attention on improving the services in the state-owned, operated, and controlled educational institutions and leave private initiatives in education, teaching and learning to continue to thrive. And there are further points and observations in support of the main submission or recommendations. I think they are important, although the main submission has been made. And so I'll continue. In general, there seems to be a feeling and certainly an argument emanating from some authorities to the effect that because every professional or because everyone else had at some stage of life to be taught by a teacher, then for that reason, the teacher ought to be accorded or given greater recognition as a profession, as a professional than that accorded to other professionals. It is submitted, however, that on the contrary, and with all due respect to teachers, that given that almost every person is a teacher at some stage of life, and that in reality there is nothing that is truly exceptional or special or novel that stands out from this broad range of teachers to distinguish them above and beyond the regard or recognition that may be supportive of an argument that the teacher, by broad definition, is perhaps the most common of all the recognized professions. It is further submitted that, in fact, one of the flaws of this present bill is that by adopting a definition of the word and person, teacher, quote unquote, to whom the requirements of certification and licensing is to apply, it is far too broad a definition and consequently has much too broad a potential reach or overreach, as some specialist educators have asserted, and should be redefined or scaled back and made to be more specific in its application. Related to that, at page 5, let me draw attention to one of the differences in relation to teachers or teaching as a profession and some other professions. During discussions and debates in relation to this bill, we have heard that one of the main objectives of the bill is to professionalize the teacher as a profession, as a professional, and so to use legislation to regulate the teaching profession in a manner that is similar to the medical profession and to the legal profession as examples. We readily agree that this is a noble and desirable objective. However, we must point out that there is a huge difference between those provisions which make it very difficult to make legislative provisions that are similar as are desired because of the very definition of the word teacher and the uncertainty as to which teacher or which sets of teachers the provision of the bill are intended or not intended to be applied to. It may be that the problem that has been created is a result of this adoption of the definition of teacher that is too broad and is certainly much broader than was ever intended by the government or than is necessary for the resolution of the challenge on confronting government-operated schools. As already suggested above, the definition is an overreach and gives more power than is necessary to the state to be able to intervene in teaching from the crib. Why should the state inhibit attempts by parents to make arrangements with private teachers to their children? This in a supposedly democratic society. Can you imagine the state being interested in requiring you to be certified for you to teach your 3, 4, or 6-year-old child, or your neighbors or friends, children at home? This is what is suggested when you look at a definition of teacher. In those circumstances where subjects are not offered in the curriculum of the official school attended by a student, why interfere with the individual privately made efforts by a parent to engage the teaching services of a teacher outside of the school. Why? Then there is a situation where the times for privately arranged lessons outside of the official school setting can be scheduled for times that are convenient to the student and his parent. Why hinder the student and family effort to gain knowledge? Then there is a situation where the times, ultimately, the various professions are simply not the same. The risks are not the same and will vary depending on the particular subject area of specialization. What is the risk involved by my entering freely into a contract as a student to take privately arranged extra lessons from a teacher with a view to taking an examination? Well, at worst, I might fail the examination, but the risk is not nearly as grave as the risk of the wrong organ being removed, as in a surgical operation, or the bridges over water collapsing, as in engineering, or in the loss of life, liberty, and property, as in lawyering. So why seek to interfere with my freedom, my ability to enter into that kind of contract? And so what I'm saying is that it isn't justified in relation to the kind of teaching that I'm referring to, the interference, the intervention. In contrast to the risk to the public posed by the work of some professions other than teaching, the latter, that is teaching, generally poses either no risk or negligible risk of loss or harm to the student. Why interfere with arrangements between adult students and private teachers? The student may have specific areas of weakness in a subject with which a private teacher could help. For example, where neither his school nor the government can help him. It may be just a little area in a particular subject. You may be having problems with calculus or with something, and somebody else outside of school can explain that to him well. Why interfere? Leave it alone. I move on to the criteria. There are other things to think about. The criteria for the measurement or rating of what makes a good, effective teacher with good teaching skills, knowledge versus teaching skills. We have not been advised or told of the criteria, so far as I know here, or rating points that may be used in determination of what makes a good teacher, although our instincts as students may be good and fairly accurate guides. Instinctively, we know when we as students or listeners in an audience have just heard a riveting, attention-grabbing, like this, a class teacher or speaker or professor argue or present a case, a situation or an explanation that has caused us to listen attentively and persuaded to understand. Yet, it is not necessarily any particular teaching skill nor set of teaching skills that causes us to be so attentive as to learn, but it could be the extent of the knowledge of the presenter along with his knowledge and personality. In tertiary institutions such as those at college and university or professional training levels, lecturers, professors, and consultants are often hired more for their knowledge, their experience, their successes in getting sometimes complex tasks done, rather than for their teaching skills. I remember where I worked up until recently. If, for instance, they were having an exercise in relation to some area of litigation, court work, some call it advocacy, and we sought someone to say something about a plea in mitigation, a client before the court to be sentenced. And we'll try and find a person who is good at that. That particular advocate, that particular counsel may not be the best appellate court lawyer, but is good at a plea mitigation. And so for different areas, you seek out the person who is good or best at that and who can communicate the skill well and may have nothing to do with training. So it will vary. And so one seeks a teacher based on different measurements, different criteria, and it's not necessarily dependent on any training. Okay? And when I say this, it's not to knock training. Training usually helps, often helps, because again, it is additional knowledge. But it doesn't necessarily make the person who is receiving the training the best teacher. That's all I'm saying. The emphasis being placed upon training and hearing of and learning of teaching skills might well be misplaced and overemphasized in certain areas of the teaching and learning processes. Hence, is certification or licensing really the correct answer to the problems of teaching in schools? It might well be, or it might not be, depending on the circumstances. But it is not the case in the private extra lesson situation, and this is largely because the teacher, the seeker of teaching services, has choices as to which teacher and what place to attend upon for these services. These students will not be concerned so much with whether the teacher has a diploma or degree in education or teaching, but rather with the teacher's reputation for good results. I remember if I saw extra lessons, I'd want to know who gets the best results, who will make me understand the particular subject. That is the person I wanted. And it's pretty similar for sport, as we can see. Okay? And the teacher being sought after need not be certified nor licensed to have those skills or attributes. So why mandate or require the certification of teachers in this area of practice? The question that naturally arises from this is, where then is the line to be drawn in deciding whether to require certification of all teachers in various areas of teaching, being mindful of the fact that there are more teachers than we may know about. It should be noted that in recent decades, there has been perhaps too much of a tendency for Western governments or in Western societies, for governments, organizations, and groups to seek to interfere in and control by way of laws and regulations, increasing the areas of human and economic life and activity. We're not saying that this is what is happening here, but just noting the tendency. Got to be careful, because soon you might reach a stage, unlikely, but you never know, where in order to have your meals cooked at home, you may need to have someone certified before you can do that. Or before you can cook for your guests at home, you yourself might need to be certified and licensed with an appropriate food handler's permit. I don't think that is where we want to go as a society, but just bear that in mind. The same thing applies to the category of teachers I'm speaking about. And so on page 7, the educator or teacher, who should be the professional, or does it matter? What I'm really raising is this, or looking at, maybe the answer, maybe what they really should be doing is have a category of teacher called an educator. Those are the ones you professionalize. That's the set that you want your teachers to work towards becoming and become elevated from teacher to senior teacher to educator. So maybe there needs to be a redefinition so that somebody who wants to become known as an educator in that profession of teaching, that is the one you want to make sure is certified under this act. That is one possible area, or one possible way to go. And so on page 7, I continue. The clearly stated objective of this legislation is to dignify and professionalize teaching as a profession. However, given the definition of teacher in the bill, along with the fact that most of us are teachers, certified or uncertified, at some time in our lives, the question that arises is who or which teacher or categories of teachers should be certified as a path to professionalization. We must be mindful of the fact that teaching existed as a profession long before any system of certification, licensing, registration, or enrollment. Being seen or recognized as a professional teacher has not been dependent on any of those factors, systems, or laws establishing systems. So what I'm saying is, forever since Jesus was recognized as teacher, and for decades and years gone by, you have had individuals whom is recognized as a teacher down the road. That man down the road, he is teacher, excellent teacher. He's been recognized as a professional. Legislation does help, it can help, or it can be an overreach. The teacher is different, not the same as from the educator, whereas the educator is a specialized branch or activity that is involved in teaching. It is not everyone who is an educator. It is strong, so we are all or have been teachers at some point in our lives, whether teaching our children or teaching others. Okay? But not everyone is an educator. So maybe it's educator they should be aiming at. Okay? Sometimes also children do learn more easily and better from other children rather than from certified adults, who also sometimes make better teachers than adult certified teachers, and who must remember, and we must remember, that the certified teacher is not necessarily a better teacher than the uncertified teacher. So, who is it that should really be certified and legally professionalized? Maybe it should be the educators rather than teachers. Maybe the authorities should seek to provide more teacher training opportunities to teachers so that they become professional educators who must be holders of certifying qualifications and would be licensed or enrolled with the established authorities as such. In that event, the bill should be amended to reflect that position. There is an error in the next line. It says attentively, it should be alternatively. Alternatively, and perhaps the easier approach, though, is to amend the bill so as to make it clear that the provisions requiring certification or licensing are not applicable to teachers in the private extra lessons arrangements. In fact, let me find in section 4, section 4, subsection 2, on page 8 of the Act. It provides this, that the Act does not apply to a person who teaches on an ad hoc, voluntary basis without pay, reward, or other consideration. Perhaps that section could be expanded to include the category of teacher whom I've referred to, or who I'm referring to in this submission. Okay? That might be an easier way to do it. Okay? Since I just read that, section 4.2 I've had a little comment on it. So it doesn't apply to persons who teach ad hoc on a voluntary basis without pay, reward, or consideration. It caused me to think, why? Why? I think it's a good provision, you know. It's a good exception. You might have somebody who comes in to give a one-off class, a one-off lecture, a one-off something. So it's a good exception. But then it makes you wonder, what has it got to do with the money? Are there other people who may do this thing without the money, but a little more than ad hoc, temporarily? But why the exception? If the concern is about the teaching skill, why not add others? Or why the special category? As I've said, I applaud it. I think it's a good exception. But let me stick to what I'm suggesting, is that the teachers in the private lesson situation should be added to that, as well as, of course, teachers in the homeschooling situation. I think I'm getting near to the end. Still on page 7, the section that says teaching, trade, barter, the marketplace, access to knowledge and information, freedom to exchange of ideas, thoughts, and skills. You may wonder, how has this come into what I'm talking about? There is a common theme or thread, that characterized places and arrangements or systems where people tend to gather, to meet, to mingle, especially in some urban location, or nowadays online, for the exchange of ideas, thoughts, the buying and selling of news, of newspapers, books, agricultural produce, foods, animals, and all manner of goods and things and services. This theme is usually referred to as the marketplace. Education, inclusive of teaching and learning, has always been a part of the marketplace. Hence my earlier reference to democratic society. I wasn't just pulling something from the Constitution. I'm saying if you look at your history, if you step back and look, part of the democratic society is really about people exchanging goods, exchanging money, buying, bartering, whatever it is, exchanging ideas. That's how ideas travel, okay? And I think that in the case of Jamaica, we tend to be an individualistic people. And where we can help ourselves or our children, we shouldn't be stifled. We should be allowed to go ahead to make these arrangements. And we hear of them later. One is in some space, something in North America. One is a prospective astronaut somewhere. One is a nuclear engineer in some place. One is perhaps on the verge, was on the verge of becoming president to a powerful country up north, etc., etc. Because we are allowed to mingle, to gather, to exchange thoughts and ideas, to learn other systems. That's what education is all about. Don't stifle it. So on page 8, I continue, because that now brings us into the realm of rights, freedoms, etc. And so the subsection, the freedoms and rights of the teacher, student, and parent in the processes of teaching and learning in a democratic society. We also bring to your attention the provisions of the Jamaica Constitution Order and Council, 1962, especially the provisions of Chapter 3, which in the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms protects the freedoms and rights of individuals. We would urge that you have a second and third look at the provisions set out below and review the proposed requirement for certification of teachers, which would include the teachers of privately arranged extra lessons, with a view to seeing whether the arrangements, whether the requirements of the Act when contemplated against the background of constitutional freedoms and rights, infringe against any of the freedoms of a teacher or the parents or the child. Let me just pause to say, I've been speaking of child, but there are mature students in tertiary institutions who also seek, get, and benefit from extra tutoring in a private arrangement. I'm speaking of those also. Even if you do not share the view that there are or maybe some infringements, we are convinced that this requirement in this context is contrary to the spirit. Let me emphasize that. So we're not saying with any certainty, we can't say with any certainty, that this involves infringement of the Charter of Freedoms and Rights. But the whole spirit of it, sometimes the spirit is even more important than the actual possibility of infringement.
1 minute, Mr. Saunders. I see Member Hamilton, you have a question?
Chair, I was waiting for Mr. Saunders to finish his presentation.
Okay, I just had a hand up. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear,
Mr. Saunders.
but I will be quick. And so, it's against that background that I invite your attention. I'm looking at section 13 of the Constitution, which falls under the fundamental rights and freedoms. Section 13, and I haven't quoted everything, but too long. But it says, it starts off in the recital, whereas a state has an obligation to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and freedoms. And B, all persons in Jamaica are entitled to preserve and for themselves and future generations the fundamental rights and freedoms to which they are entitled by virtue of their inherent dignity as persons and as citizens of a free and democratic society. So it really is just a reminder that we are in a democratic society, and all of us, our government and ourselves, should be mindful of that. Okay? But it continues on learning the freedom, so to do signals the existence of a free and democratic society. A comment that I make is this: teaching is so fundamental and basic and a natural part of human activity that the state should be careful not to interfere with this liberty, but should instead facilitate and encourage it. It's connected to freedom of expression and thought and exchange of ideas. The stifling of that is more associated with other kinds of societies. Let ours thrive. And so let teaching and learning in the marketplace thrive. Section 13, subsection 3 of the Charter of Rights or of the Constitution refers to the right to freedom of expression. Did say there was a connection. Subsection 3C, the right to seek, receive, distribute, disseminate disseminate information, opinions, and ideas through any media. Okay? It speaks of media there, but the spirit of the whole thing is really an exchange of thoughts and ideas. So teachers teach, students learn, and sometimes in that process, students who give feedback to teachers also teach teachers. Okay? And my comment there is, even if the framers of the Constitution did not have in mind teaching as a specific activity, among others, as a right in the above, E and F, it certainly cannot be said that teaching is to be excluded as a fundamental right. So it might be possible to argue successfully that interference in the private arrangements that people make for extra lessons might well amount to an infringement of this freedom as set out here. But as I said, even if one disregards the legality, the constitutionality of the position, the spirit should impel us to do as recommended, and that is leave the private arrangements to continue to thrive. Section 13.3, subsection 3J, the right of everyone to respect for and protection of private and family life, privacy of home. And section 13.3K, the right of every child to such measures of protection as are required by virtue of being a minor. And again, in the spirit of the democratic society, we say that private extra lessons arrangements fall within that framework, and we say leave it alone. And so we recommend that the above provisions for fundamental rights and freedoms be reviewed with a view to deciding that even if there is room for doubt and debate as to whether the proposed restrictions and interference with private extra license arrangements do not infringe the rights of citizens, that having regard to the spirit of the provisions, individually and collectively, that it would be far more consistent in accord with the spirit of the constitutional protection of freedoms to restrict the power of the state to interfere with either private extra lessons or with homeschooling, to restrict the power of the state with either private or extra lessons arrangements. There is a repetition there which I ask you to strike out. And those accordingly are my submissions. I hope I've come across clearly, members, and I hope I haven't put you to sleep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saunders. Members? Member Hamilton? Yes, I know. Yeah, I know. Member Hamilton, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Saunders, I listened to your presentation keenly, and I note the impassioned plea for our tutors. Thank you for the presentation, by the way. But I just have one clarification. I mean, I want to get further information as to the type of teacher, the type of tutor that you're referring to. Why I say this is because based on what I've heard from you, there seems to be different or varying types of tutors that exist out there currently. But I want further clarity as to the exact tutor that will be affected. And why I ask for the exact tutor is because I believe you are not really referring to those persons who provide voluntary tutoring, as was espoused from clause 4.2. And I don't believe you are referring to tutors who are already or would already be in the formal system, because they would be taken care of in the Act. But you are referring to that specific grouping that operate for reward. Do you have any data as to the number of persons who operate in this space, for example? And are you proposing that those persons who operate in this space for reward should not be required to have the necessary qualifications to teach? And is this requirement for qualifications being deemed by you as stifling those tutors?
Actually, I wonder if you missed the first part of my presentation.
No, I was here for the entire period. But there is this sense to me that it is really those persons for reward, because outside of that, everybody else would be taken care of in the legislation.
I'm referring to those teachers whom, whether I as a parent or a student, will contact. That teacher teaches privately, is hired in a private contractual arrangement outside of any official governmentally owned, operated school system. I may hire the teacher for a specific subject or even a part of a subject, but it is part of a contractual arrangement in which a teacher teaches my child or perhaps myself. We have them all over Jamaica. That is my emphasis. I'm not sure if...
Do you have data on the number of those persons that exist currently?
No, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because another thing I was going to suggest is that maybe the ministry might have done some survey. I don't know if they reached out or maybe they weren't thought about. But I haven't got any data, but we know that they exist. Because we know, as I've said, every year when the results of examinations come in, we see references to interviews done of students who will say, I got 2 1s. I went to extra lessons with Mr. X or Miss Y or Miss Z. Okay? We see students who maybe did these examinations from as early as 3rd form, right? The school was going to enter them in 3rd form, but they thought they could do it, and they did it easily. I noticed that there is a recently noted track star from a school who has how many 1s? I don't know. I don't have any data that tells me whether he did them all in one sitting. Yes, I didn't want to. Yes, right? I don't know whether they got them all in one sitting, but sometimes they gather them between 3rd form and 5th form. All I'm saying is allow the people to do the thing, right? The school may say, no, our policy is that everybody must take 10 in 5th form. But if mine wants to do it in 2nd form, let them. I'm sure I read recently of somebody in 1st form in a school here, 1st form high school, who was successful in those examinations and gained good grades from as early as 1st form. Allow the people, and it wasn't through the school, it was through private arrangements. So those are the teachers I'm referring to, right? And so all I'm suggesting is that this act, as noble as intention is, restrict it to where the problem is. It may be, so how are we here? Is this what the government wanted? I suspect not, right? Because this is a matter of policy in a way, okay? This reach to control the teachers who teach extra lessons in their private space, whether at home or in a particular building at a particular address. Okay? What I would want to suggest is that, as I said, maybe the ministry could do a survey or reach out to these persons and ask them, inquire of them, you know, in a helpful way, rather than in a way that may seem to be designed to trap them into some sort of system that requires them to be certified. I don't know if I've answered the question or responded adequately. The only reason I referred a while ago to this exception in section 4.2 in relation to the ad hoc teacher is to say that perhaps the simplest method is to say that teachers, in the arrangements I'm speaking about, that this act does not apply to those teachers. And add that to the list. There may be others too. Those and homeschoolers. Because, interestingly, in section 4.1, the interpretation section, is it interpretation? 4.1 E and F of the Act. This Act applies to, whom does the Act apply to? He says a person who teaches in an approved home education program, including a parent who teaches his own child at home, and F, a private tutor, whether practicing full-time or part-time. It seems that those are the same two categories I'm speaking about. And all I'm saying is, leave them alone. If I want to teach my child, and I'm teaching them anyway.
Member Gale.
Mr. Saunders, I want to thank you for coming here and making this presentation. And I think it's important that, when we are going through certain critical legislations as this, the informed position of members of society is presented. And the group that you spoke about is a group that is critical in the scheme of things, because a lot of students would go through participating in part of their preparation for examination with these private tutors. And so we wanted to hear the feedback from these private tutors. Now, for all of us in this room who are professionals, the teacher's expectation is that we would be qualified and certified. And so I don't believe it's overreaching when we want our teachers to be qualified and certified. And I listen to you, and I understand advocacy. Using the term of stifling, overreaching, interference, and infringement. Those are terms that as a trade unionist I would use as an advocate. But I really don't believe that the intention of this bill is seeking to do so. And I want to lay that absolutely clear. It's professionalizing the legislation that protects teachers. And for a moment, I listened to your presentation and I was wondering if you had read clause 4.2 until you read it, because it was key. And I want to understand a little further from you in terms of, how can we treat this grouping of instructors, private tutors? Because we run the risk, Mr. Saunders, in this country, in not having inclusion of sectors of society that are professionals. We leave them out. They are underground as part of the economy. Now, I think this legislation is seeking not to entrap them, but to capture them. And as you made reference to, if we could possibly gather some data and feedback from them, then it could enhance how we can protect them as a society. And I believe this is what the bill is seeking to do. Now, you also made reference to 21 in terms of the registration. And I'm thinking that this registration is doing something else that is not necessarily captured here, but to have them registered as part of a pool so that we can all be aware of where they are, how they operate, market them, utilize them. So 21, I believe, is a key aspect of the legislation in terms of protecting this critical group that you have represented here today. But I'm interested in how we could treat it as part of 4.2, not only those who volunteer. You made reference to, can you imagine the state being interested in requiring you to be certified for you to teach your 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old and your neighbors or friends? I don't think that's what it intended to do. But we have to capture this critical grouping to which you speak of in terms of private tutors, because how they have represented, how they have taught students to not only to pass, But to become certified is critical. They are utilized. They are a support to the system. And I agree where we can treat with them, we can find a way to treat with them. 4.2 speaks of, without peer reward or consideration. Maybe coming out of your presentation, we can think about a concept of how to treat with those. So, Chair, that's my representation on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Rodriguez? Rodriguez, she was
Oh.
before you, yeah.
Usually the mothers who look for the extra lessons teacher too.
Right. So you have given me things to think about, and there are some issues that, and that's a good thing about committees, is that we listen to so many different things before we can deliberate, and sometimes you nudge us a little bit more than we would otherwise be nudged. As a mother and a former teacher who was not trained in the Teachers College, I relate to some of what you say. Some of the things I completely disagree with. For example, homeschooling, I do not believe that because you're homeschooled, you should not be exposed to proper teaching. The pedagogy behind teaching and etc., I do believe homeschoolers should not be just left to somebody deciding, oh, I want you to teach at home. If it is, Madam Chair, that they're going to enroll in an online program from home, all of that works, but I do not believe that our homeschoolers should be disadvantaged by anybody can just teach them. I think that would be wrong, especially with what we want to do. However, I hear you, especially when you pulled for Madam Constitution here. I heard what you had to say about the rights being infringed, etc. But also, when it comes on to the subjects of mathematics, physics, and languages, we do have a problem in having enough teachers who can teach it properly and who are also have a great grasp of the situation. For example, my younger daughter did the IB, and she chose to do physics at the higher level. She felt she needed a tutor. I could not find one trained physics teacher in Jamaica who was able to do that, because there were only 3 of them in the island, only 3, and none of them did private tutoring. I had to find somebody who is a physicist who was willing to tutor her. So it don't mean he can teach. It ended up that he could teach, but he never had the pedagogy knowledge. He never had the techniques of a real teacher. But I hear you, there are situations, and it also happens with languages and with mathematics. So physics, math, and the languages are the ones most affected, in my opinion, non-scientific opinion, where this may become an issue. And this is where now I will join with you in saying we need to be careful that we don't lock out tutors who are untrained. However, I would suggest, and I would like to hear your opinion on my suggestion, that, of course, all teachers are licensed. And then for tutors, post-primary, because I'm 100% against untrained teachers teaching at the primary level, and early childhood. So anything primary and early childhood, I am 100% against untrained persons in those areas, because that is when our children learn the basics of learning more than anything else. And to have an untrained person, I think is wrong. But let us talk now about high school and above. I believe you should have the certification where you can show your card, I'm a trained teacher. And you have another certification or another card which says, I am a tutor. Parents are discerning, and parents make what they consider the best decision for their children. I am convinced that in areas where enough teachers exist, the parents will choose the trained teacher. But if you have, I don't know what your thoughts are, if you have both certifications, so somebody could have both certifications, teacher and tutor. And then some will only have tutor. Because as I said, there are areas where we have no trained persons offering private lessons in those. What are your thoughts on that idea? And then the parents can make the choice from that.
Thank you. I agree with 90% of what you have said. It sounds like we have had similar experiences. However, I got the feeling towards the end that you're sort of mixing the teacher in the official system with the kind of teacher that we are otherwise referring to. So
let me clarify with you. I am mixing because most tutors are already trained teachers, so they would fit into the category of teacher. But I'm saying there's that small area where you don't have a trained teacher, but you have a tutor who could impart the knowledge. Give them a tag of a tutor. So some tutors, so to teach private lessons, you must at least be a tutor. But some tutors are also trained teachers. So I'm asking, what are your thoughts if we did that?
I still say, leave the people alone. And why do I say that? Okay, let us say now we are in the end of June, the long summer holidays coming up. We'll soon have children living not only in Kingston or some urban area, but in rural areas. I grew up in a rural area. And so my own parents recognized at a certain stage, whoops, he has lost a lot during these summer periods. And so there are some of us, I as a parent, will now say to my grandchild, July, August, read. Pick up books and read. Reading, I think, is the most important thing, right? Because if you can read, love language, love to express yourself in all kinds of ways, you're off. But beyond reading, as you mentioned, physics and maths and language, it may be that I, like you, can't find a certified teacher anywhere around. So it may be better, as in my case, right, as a child, I was referred to a sixth former who was accessible, who I didn't have to go and get a bus to go and travel to, who was nearby and accessible like somebody in Kingston, right, to teach what he knew of his subject, okay? And that's why I say we have to think outside of our own skills in contacting a certified teacher. And it may be, not maybe, I know that there will be situations where you can only turn to who you can get. And you know, and all I'm saying, it is better, I submit, to get the help from someone, even if not certified, than to have your child ramp and ramp for July and August, and when they get back to school in September, they start all over again. And they spend the first term, depending on what class or form they are in, doing over what they should have done the year before. And so it's repeated until all of a sudden they are in fifth form and it's too late, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of practice, you know. Sometimes what they do is practice, and you really have somebody supervising them or somebody to teach them some aspect of the subject, whether it is physics or the maths or the foreign language. So I'm just saying it all depends on the circumstances. But in general, let the legislation focus on the problem. I think the problem area is, as you mentioned, primary school. And so that's in the official system. The school is in the official system. I'm speaking of arrangements outside.
Member Green?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Saunders. I'll try not to go over what has already been covered by my colleagues. And let me just thank you for taking the time to make the presentation. A number of us would have experienced you as a teacher as well during your time at the Legal Aid Council while we were at law school. And just like you, I too am a rural man. So I'm appreciative of some of the arrangements of which you refer. I do believe that you've gone a bit too far in suggesting that because it's a private arrangement that we should just leave it be. If that were the case, then people could choose anybody to walk into a courtroom to be their lawyer, because we could say it's a private arrangement, because it is 90% of our legal matters are private. Somebody goes out to find a lawyer, and you could say that from growing up in rural Jamaica, that there was a really good person in the community who if he were to go in the court, the judge would believe him. But you couldn't choose him, because in the wisdom of policymakers and governments, we've recognized that if somebody says that they are a lawyer, it has to mean something, and they have to have the qualifications to go with it. And especially because you're going to be transacting money, you're going to be paying for their service, the government takes on a certain responsibility to provide some safeguards to the population to say, all right, if you're going to be paying for a service, we can't guarantee you that the lawyer is good, but we can say that the lawyer has passed this minimum standard. I think that is what this bill is about. This bill is about setting some minimum standards so that when you are going to make professional arrangements for somebody to teach your child, that the government steps in and says, well, this person has passed a minimum standard. And if you were to say, leave it to the private people for teaching, you would have to say it for law. Because I would say, it's hard to argue which one is more important, but I've said it already that I believe teaching is the most important profession. So I think we should be careful of how we just say leave it be. It's private, leave it be. Because again, we would have to look back at all these arrangements that we've made regarding safeguards for people who pass themselves off as being competent in a certain profession. So that's one. The other area is that some of the examples, and I think Member Gill made the point, they do not apply, because the sixth form student who is willing, after your mother has spoken to him, to come and to help, or her to help you, guide you during the summer, those ad hoc arrangements, they're exempted from the act. So where the act steps in is when oftentimes parents are going out to hire a professional tutor to come into their home or wherever, or send the child to some extra lesson, and the person has said they have competency to provide educational direction in this specific area. And what I see the bill is saying is that if you're going to say that you do, there has to be some standard that we can say, yes, you do. We can't say if Cavan is better than Member Rodriguez, but we can say both of them have qualified, they have at least these minimum standards, so it would be, you can decide who you treat with. So I see it as akin to steps that were taken to professionalize the legal profession, and I see the basis as being basically the same.
May I make just a little, in relation to the profession of law, with great respect, to the best of my knowledge, a person in most situations, except of course where it is specifically, they say specifically A or B is entitled to be represented by an attorney at law. Very often the language is legal representative, and I would dare to say that there are situations, including those in the Constitution, in which I would be entitled to be represented not by an attorney at law, including an attorney at law, but by represented by anybody I choose. That is my right. The person doesn't have to be an attorney. Of course, there are consequences. It is a heavy risk that I take if I ask you, not an attorney, to represent me. I'm running a risk, but it is my right, and there are consequences. It means that the person who is not a lawyer cannot go to the court and say, I am a lawyer. That would be an offense. Cannot stand in what's called the benches set out for lawyers. Would have to stand in the well of the court at the side or something to address the court and be heard. But my understanding is that I can be represented by a legal representative other than a lawyer, so long as the person isn't pretending nor holding himself or herself out to be a lawyer. That is my understanding. I'm certainly not charging a fee so to do.
So, but the principle is the same, Sir Saunders. The principle, because again, under this bill, you can go and provide. You could come and I could say, Sir Saunders, boy, I'm not going to pay you, but I want you to come and provide some direction for my son, because I know that you are a lawyer and you have been through the system. That can be facilitated. And again, if I decide at home that I want to teach my children to some degree, that is facilitated. It is, again, as you said, when there must be a higher standard once a business relationship is to be established.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Saunders, thank you for your presentation. As the other members said, you really brought up some issues that are important for us to consider, as we try to put together a fulsome bill. I wanted to put to you, though, an issue that I would want to hear your views on, because I believe that the bill is not only trying to get practitioners, teachers, to actually be qualified and certified, but I think one of the important intentions of the bill also is to protect students, is to protect the young people that the teachers are imparting knowledge to. And one of the issues that I foresee with the arrangement that you're putting forward of private tutors, not being subjected to any of the licensing and registration requirements, is that we run the risk of having persons who are dealing with young people, dealing with children, who we don't know anything about them. And I recall Senator Rodriguez putting forward a suggestion that I would want us to discuss a little bit more about how we can account for these tutors in our system, because I think it's important for us to know who they are, their background, as the bill asks for, the criminal background, and to ensure that, we can actually trust these persons with young people. So I wanted to hear your views on that. For me, I believe that we should at least have a record of who these persons are, where they are, and what they're doing. But I'd want to hear from you. But thank you again for the presentation. Much appreciated.
You're most welcome, madam. May I just clarify something, though? You're not saying that they need to be certified, but there should be a record, perhaps something like a register or knowledge as to who they are.
Right, and just to say that, especially in the case of tutors in areas like you said, math and physics, where I can appreciate that it's difficult to find persons who are actually teachers in these areas. For them especially, I know that there are many young people who might go to these classes. What I'm saying is that while they may not have the requirements that we're asking of the other teachers, we have to account for them. So we have to know that they are tutors. Call them tutors, right? And have a record of who they are.
What I think you're suggesting is certainly less stringent and perhaps could be tried, could work. It's workable, As regards other concerns, you didn't specify, but there are other laws that are there to protect children, Child Care and Protection Act. But just listening and paying attention to the news, I haven't heard of any problem with the teachers I'm talking about. I hear of them, I don't know if it's because of the way the media reports, I hear of them in coming out of the official school system, right? But not in relation to the arrangement. Because usually, you know, parents make their inquiries, they do their, call it due diligence investigation, and for most parents, they would seek out somebody who is reputable, who is known about, etc. Yeah?
Chair, if I could just follow up on that quickly. But Mr. Saunders, the issue, you know, that I think we have to appreciate is that a lot of times people just don't know. And it might not be out there in the public domain, but I think having something like this, where at least they are subjected to the requirement to put in a background check, that kind of thing, it kind of cuts away at, you know, having those instances. Even though it might not, you know, be public knowledge now, we have to account for what could be. That's my thought on it.
I understand. Without an absence of data, though, it just seems to me, when I started, I started by one of the things I said is that I haven't heard of any adverse comments or observations in relation to that category of teachers. I have heard really only of good things, right? I don't know where, for instance, the football academies fall, but we know that there are young people who play football, play sports with the academies. It facilitates sport. The regular school system doesn't facilitate sport as much, but the academies facilitate like football, as well as academics, they go together, okay? But I'm not even speaking of those. I'm speaking of the private arrangements. So all I'm saying is, it strikes me that as a society, as a nation, we're likely to make more progress in the, if those arrangements are allowed to continue as they are than otherwise. I think we start to overregulate, we're going to start to run into problems.
The only difference I have with your argument, Mr. Saunders, is that our lawmakers of the past never made laws based on occasions or incidents that may have happened, but the assumption of future occurrences. And I believe this is what we're trying to capture. So we may not have heard of any instance today, but there are none of us in this room that can detect what may happen tomorrow. And so we make provisions in keeping with what may occur. And this is seeking just to protect those instances, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. I have no rebuttal. I hold my point for those whom I represent. Suppose a matter of judgment. I think we've been in error, though, as a still young, growing nation, to restrict those whom I represent.
So, Mr. Saunders, thank you so much for your presentation. I just want to say that as an economy grows, you have to move from the informal to the formal. And the teaching profession is one such that we have allowed to be an informal profession. And what we're trying to do is to make it more formal, to let Jamaican people know that there's a minimum requirement, and that teachers would be qualified and certified and licensed. And I hear the arguments in terms of private tutors and the fact that you have not heard anything untoward about them, but I would say to you that in situations that may have happened, I'm sure the person is not going to say, I am a tutor. They're not going to identify themselves as being a tutor in the same way that a teacher would identify themselves as being a teacher. So maybe that's why you haven't heard issues that have happened in that circle. We will definitely take into consideration your submission because you've come to advocate for a certain segment of this teaching profession, could I call it that? A certain segment. But at the end of the day, as I think members would have articulated, there has to be some minimum requirement, some level of checks. There has to be some formality to all of this. It cannot just be left to say it's a private arrangement and therefore I should be left to do what I want to do. Member Green would have given a very pointed example from the legal profession in terms of if you're a village lawyer, should you be able to go and represent people in court? No, you won't be able to, right? So we want to signal to Jamaicans that teaching is a profession like other professions. And I know you mentioned in your submission that, you know, if a surgeon makes a mistake, it's a lot greater than if a teacher makes a mistake, right? And I would disagree with that because the teacher is the one who would have taught that surgeon. We all agree that teaching is a very, very old profession that dates back to, you said, Jesus, and maybe before that. But it's a profession that I think we need to restore to a point of prominence, at least in our society, and to begin to make it more formal than it is currently.
Thank you, Minister. I thank you and the committee for having heard me. At least I was heard. I can't say I wasn't heard. And in general, if I may say, I like the style of hearing from other persons outside of this house. Thank you. May I be released?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're free to go.
Thank you, Minister. In a moment. Pay attention to my age and condition. Thank you.
That's it for today, Minister?
Yeah, we have a few things to wrap up. The minutes. Confirmation of the minutes. All right, I'll start with page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Yeah.
Page 5, at the bottom, Senator Campbell Rodriguez, just at the point there, Campbell Rodriguez as a hyphen, and not a pro. That's without a hyphen. But the main point I was making there, Madam Chair, is that the second sentence, which now reads, she stated that the legal team should determine the punishment of teachers that commit the offense
Thank you. Page 6. We're confirming now, then we could do matters arising. Page 6. Page 7.
It's Friday, Mike. On page 7, last paragraph before closing remarks, it's Campbell Rodriguez, not Rodriguez Campbell. And if it could be asked if the bill had to be more protective, the question I asked was, if the bill had to be more protective of one group of stakeholders, who would it be? Versus what is written there now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ask for confirmation of the minutes.
So moved, Madam Chair.
So moved by Member Rodriguez, seconded by Member Gale. Any items arising from the minutes?
Yes, Madam Chair. On page 6, the issue Member Morgan raised about disqualifying offenses. I just wanted to get an idea. He suggested a revision, which several of us agreed with. I just wanted to know, when would we get something from, I think, the legal team about that? And further down, the second to last paragraph under questions, answers, and comments, I wanted to ask if that would be included in the regulations versus in the bill itself. Because it was saying, Minister Morgan clarified whether it was to be clearly stated in the bill that parents should not bear the burden of teachers' education development. I remember the presenter submitted to us that they were concerned that schools would probably find a way to put the registration fee for teachers into miscellaneous fees at the schools. And so Minister Morgan had sought that clarification, but I don't think we really knew whether or not, I don't know whether or not it belongs in the regulations or in the bill. And so I'm asking for some clarification on that as well.
Ms. Sherlock, any thoughts?
Yes, Minister. In relation to the definition for disqualifying offenses, that one? Okay. Well, that's a policy decision as to whether or not we are going to, because initially in the bill, we had a list of offenses from different pieces of legislation that could be considered disqualifying offenses. So I don't know if we want to go back to that, because as it is now, the term is defined as once it attracts a custodial sentence of 2 years, then it is a disqualifying offense. So that's a decision that has to be made whether we're going to revert and go back to listing those offenses.
If I remember what Minister Morgan pointed out then, he raised the issue of the case that was brought to our attention in that meeting, where that teacher did not get a custodial sentence at all. But he wasn't even suspended. But what he did in many of our minds was so egregious that he doesn't belong in the classroom. So I think it's within that context Minister Morgan raised the issue that we have to revise this disqualifying offense. So I just want to ensure it doesn't get lost as something not done. So you're saying it's not the legal team, it's the policy, which would mean minister. But if I may just suggest that something is drafted up so at least minister could look at it as a starting point. If we could just have something, for her to look at as a starting point for us to have that discussion as to, because, 20 total agreement with Minister Morgan that as is here, it doesn't meet the standard of what we need to happen.
Well, there is a comprehensive list of those kinds of offenses in the Anti-Gang Act, which perhaps we could look at. The challenge with what we had before was to ensure that we are not missing out, we are not missing any offense. So that is one of the challenges. But I suppose we could try and craft as comprehensive a list as is possible so that the committee could look at it.
Do we have we looked within the Commonwealth or within just the Caribbean to see if another bill relating to teachers has anything crafted, in any way? I'm just wondering if we could spend some time to do that side of the research, because we're thinking of it a particular way, but maybe another jurisdiction has a piece of a wording that we could do. So I'm just suggesting, Madam Chair, through you, that if that research could be done on our behalf, then we could see what is possible. I just don't want this to fall off the radar at all. And go ahead.
I just want to understand if in the first instance we're trying to draft it in such a way where it appears all-inclusive, capturing, rather than listing, that someone could say, but this was not intended to be in it, or this was not in it. So there are some legislations that are written all-inclusive. It just captures rather than list. And I believe that was the first intent. So it's now a policy decision whether or not we choose either way, correct?
Or we look at other options.
By listing, it would capture the scenario that was explained some weeks ago, where once a person is convicted of an offense, irrespective of what the court decides to do in terms of sentencing, then that person would be captured. So perhaps we can look back at that, or, as Member Rodriguez was saying, we could look at other pieces of legislation to see perhaps how they have dealt with it.
All right, thank you. One other administrative matter.
Minister, there was another matter arising that I mentioned. I don't know. Again, for the legal team, the second to last paragraph, again, something Minister Morgan had said, and I was asking whether or not we knew if this is something that should go in the regulations versus in the bill.
Talking about the fees?
About the fees. Just to remind you, the presenter had said they don't want the fees for the teachers to pay for their license. They didn't want it to be snuck into miscellaneous fees, and I'm paraphrasing here, for them parents to assume. And so Minister Morgan had sought clarification whether or not it should be stated in the bills, and I'm adding to that by asking, would it go in the bill or in the regulations?
Well, it could be specified in the regulations, but that would mean that the regulations would have to come swiftly behind the bill, because then you can't use the bill. You wouldn't be able to use the act if it is passed without the regulations.
And as I'm new, I just want clarification. What, Madam Chair, prevents the regulations from coming swiftly after the bill?
Well, for the drafters, we'd have to get instructions as to what should be contained in the regulations so that we can, quickly draft that.
We are working on the regulations. All right, I have one additional item. We had agreed that the extended deadline for submissions would be July 11th. We wrote through Mr. Nash, through the Parliament, we wrote to student bodies, we wrote to the Jamaica Union of Tertiary Students, the Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica, National Secondary Schools Council, and to the Jamaica Independent, Jamaica Independent Schools as well, who stated that they might not make the deadline of July 11th. And the student bodies, we're hoping that we hear back from them this week. One of them. We've heard from one of them. We've heard from one of them this week. So we would be able to take that submission at our next meeting, which will be July 7th.
Heard meaning that they have sent a submission? Oh, okay.
Okay. All right, one, so we need to confirm an extension to the deadline for submissions to be what, end of July? To be the end of July? Okay. No, submissions, Deadline for submission.
Did they give a suggestion?
The student bodies, at least one of them, right, said that they should be able to make a submission by the end of this week, send in their submission by the end of this week, and if they do, we'd be able to take them at our next meeting. No, we haven't heard, other than saying that they won't be able to make that deadline. They haven't said otherwise. But members, we have been here since when? When did we start this? March? February. We've been here since February. We put out notices.
The thing, no, Chair, if we extend the deadline to the end of July and Parliament goes on recess in August, then we would not be meeting until September. And so everybody would have some flexibility that was not provided. And so when we resume in September, we will just be hearing those if they have submitted. And then we can do all that we want to do in September, possibly conclude.
Chair, what is the present deadline?
July 11th.
That was the extended deadline.
That was the extended deadline.
Yes.
Yeah, extended deadline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I had hoped for, Chair, is that we would be finished with the submissions so that, remember now, the parliamentary team will have to take that summer recess and pull together the sort of matrix of the various suggestions. All right? And, you know, it may not seem like we've covered a lot of ground, but a lot of different points and grounds have been raised. So they would have to now put in additional things to that matrix. My hope is to take some of the recess to look at the matrix and start, you know. So I had hoped that when we got back in September, we would really just be going to the matrix and signing off on the various clauses. Because, again, I said it when we started, you know, the year is fast coming to an end, you know.
That means, Member Green, that we would have to try and capture some dates in July.
We have July 21 and July 28. But as I was saying, we've been here since February in this parliament. We would have put out a deadline prior to starting the Joint Select Committee. We extended that deadline. We would have written already, right, to these student groups, and we wrote again. So I believe that we have been more than fair, more than lenient, more than patient in terms of the submission. Yes. We're adding the 28th. 10.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Can you please use the other microphone? That one's not working for the record. Thank you.
If we're going to be here on the 21st, because it is just that I think if we can facilitate the students, we should, but at the same time without extending anymore. But if they can't meet the 11th and we're meeting on the 21st, and they can meet, because we're going to have to break August anyway, unless we agree to. We're going to be breaking. So there will be a lag. So if we give them till the 21st, Minister, and even if we start the work that we intended on the 21st, this is just one group of students. And if we just give them till the 21st, and that's it. If they can't meet it, so be it. We have done everything we can to facilitate them. Because, you see, Minister, what I don't want them to say is that they never know about it because it was only in the newspaper. Because we don't have social media presence for the parliament, and that's where young people are to be found. So that's why I just want us to try, if we can give them the 21st.
Well, we would have written to them. We would have written to their group, 3 groups, the Jamaica Union of Tertiary Students, Youth Advisory Council of Jamaica, National Secondary Student Council. For a second time, we would have written to them.
Agreed, Minister.
All right.
Minister, I also agree with Senator Campbell Rodriguez. If we can facilitate them on the 21st, I think we should really try our best to. It would be good to hear from them. Yeah.
All right, but on the 21st, we are going to move into the matrix. If they show up on the 21st,
yeah, so I would join Minister in making a special outreach because it's the one group that we really haven't heard from in terms of the students, you know. So I'm sure some of them are watching now. So we are making it clear that we are willing to facilitate them coming and presenting on the 21st. Yep. Right.
Again. All right, any other business? We would have talked about the date of the next meeting being Thursday, July 21st, 2022. All right, the Joint Select Committee. Hold on, I'm sorry. The next meeting date is July 7, 2022. All right, so given that we are moving the deadline to July 21st, are you saying, Mr. Nash, should we still meet for the 7th? Right. Should we still meet for the 7th? Right, okay, yes. So the next meeting date would be July 7th, 2022, and future meeting dates, so you can pencil it into your calendars, July 21st and July 28th. Thank you, members. Meeting is adjourned.